The U.S. involvement of World War I began when the Zimmerman Note proved to be a threat to blow up U.S. ships. When the American ship Lusitania was hit with a German torpedo, America went to war. The lesson we should have learned from this was if we're going to go to war, we need to have enough money to pay for it, because we took a lot of different actions to support this.
The war effort began with supporting the cost of war. President Woodrow Wilson came up with the Liberty Bonds that were sold to Americans in form of a typical bond, just labeled differently to convince citizens to support the war effort. Children saved up for these stamps, and after collecting a certain amount, they would turn in the collection for a bond. In total, Liberty Bonds brought in a grand total of $17 billion to the U.S. War Fund. This was a huge benefit to the economic side of World War I. In order to promote the Liberty Bonds in a war effort, Wilson hired artists and advertising experts that created and designed propaganda posters. An example of a famous World War I propaganda poster is the one that said, "I want you for the U.S. Army," that included Uncle Sam pointing at the reader. Wilson also hired famous celebrities and opera singers to advertise the war effort. The propaganda appealed to patriotism, fear, and sympathy for war victims.
Hoover created Victory Gardens, which encouraged Americans to grow and produce food and veggies at home. He also had ideas for wheatless Wednesdays, gasless Sundays, and heatless Mondays to encourage the conservation of these substances. The Congress ratified the 18th Amendment in 1919, which banned the production of alcohol. This conserved ingredients like grapes and wheat. Through all of his effort, the U.S. had a food surplus and exported 3 times as much food as before the war. This seriously benefited the social and economic aspects of the war. Harry Garfield also headed the Fuel Administration and came up with the Lever Food and Fuel Act that established a price and production control for fuel, and Garfield was able to come up with daylight saving hours to encourage fuel conservation. The manufacturing laws known today, such as work conditions and 8-hour workdays, developed during World War I. Women took over many of men's jobs as they went off to war. This boosted the U.S. and many allies' economies. President Wilson was also recognized the women's war effort, saying that the war could not have been fought without their efforts.
Became strong, and the majority of citizens who originally wanted to stay neutral and uninvolved in the war sided with the war effort. There was a factor that directly affected the war effort. Influenza struck in 1918 and 1919, killing soldiers. Nearly half of the soldiers that did die from the disease. The outbreak in Europe spread quickly because of the crowded trenches. This disease was not like the flu we know today. It killed people who were once just healthy. In October of 1918 alone, 200,000 Americans were killed. Many people blamed the Germans for it. The aftermath was 675,000 lost lives, turning out to be the deadliest epidemic in the U.S. history. U.S. severely affected the social aspect of the war.
In 1917, Congress passed the Espionage Act, which punished citizens for aiding the enemy or refusing military duty. A year later, the Sedition Act was passed, making it illegal for Americans to utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal or abusive language that criticized the government, flag, or military in any way. The U.S. Supreme Court struggled to interpret these laws. An example of this would be Schenck versus the U.S.
During World War I, Germany was against the U.S. America ended up with a semi-victory because in 1918, Germany waved a white flag and signed the Treaty of Versailles. In 1919, overall, the U.S. should learn not to go into war if we do not have the money to pay for it. Also, American citizens should learn that propaganda was created to influence your judgment on the war effort and other things like that. The end.